Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Gemma Louise and today I'm going to be looking into the horrific case of David McGreavy. It was also dubbed the Friday the 13th murders. If you enjoy my videos and you haven't already, please click the subscribe button below and also the little bell so you get a notification every time I upload a new video. Let's get into it. David McGreavy was born in 1951 in the English town of Southport to parents Bella and Thomas McGreavy. He was the second eldest of 6 children, and his dad was a sergeant in the Royal Signals, which meant that he would move around a lot as a child, going from sort of military base to military base. I think he spent a lot of time in the UK and in Germany. But other than that, a seemingly normal childhood. Now, McGreavy had a childhood dream of carving out a successful career for himself in the Navy. So in 1967, when he was aged just 15, he left school and he enlisted into the Royal Navy. Now, from the research that I've done, I don't think he was all that popular, shall we say, in the Navy. Here, some of his colleagues have described him as being quite arrogant and cocky, the type of person who always needs to have the last word. So, although they didn't dislike him, he certainly was not a popular character. But it's during his time in the Navy that we start to get the first examples of his impulsive behaviour. While he was working as a steward in the mess hall, McGreavy saw his name written down in the Chief Petty Officer's book. He assumed that this meant that he would have to change jobs, and so he went away to stew on this because he wasn't particularly happy and he got drunk. Now, at the start of his next shift, his next watch, he's reported to have turned up still agitated from seeing his name and still intoxicated from the drink. And what he did was he went into the mess wardroom and started a fire, which ultimately destroyed the room. He was court-martialed for this. Towards the end of his naval career, McGreavy met a young woman by the name of Mary and they became engaged. He would write to her several times a week when they were off. When he was on shore leave, they would spend long weekends together. And by all accounts, he was very much in love with her. So when he was dismissed from the Navy in August of 1971, Mary became his sole focus, the main thing in his life that he had to focus on now that his career was in tatters. So he comes out of the Navy, he has to move back in with his parents, and he begins planning his wedding to Mary. For an unknown reason, on New Year's Eve of 1971, so just 4 months after he was dismissed from the Navy, Mary calls off the engagement. So McGreavy finds himself starting 1972 as a 20-year-old man. His Navy career is ruined. The woman he loves has left him. He's living at home with his mum and dad. He's got no job. He had tried to keep several civilian jobs, and every time he would get fired for his attitude. So he's broke and he starts to drink very heavily. Now his mum and dad, tire of this very, very quickly. He's not contributing to the house, he's disrespectful, and so they ask him to leave. That is when he reconnects with an old school friend, Clive Ralph, who offers him a room to rent in his house that he shares with his wife, Elsie, and his 2 small children, Paul, who is 3 years old, and 20-month-old Dawn. Now the house it's only a 2-bedroom terraced style house, so it's very cramped to begin with. So McGreavy moves in to the Ralph household on Gilham Road in Worcester. And at first everything seems to be going fine. He's contributing towards the household, he's paying £6 a week in board. McGreavy is described as being helpful around the house. Clive works long hours as a lorry driver, so he's often away from the home, and Elsie's got 3 young children to look after, and McGreavy, he helps with the children, He helps do the cooking sometimes, so there was no inkling that he would end up committing the horrific crime that he did. Elsie had taken a part-time job as a barmaid in a pub that was only around 2 miles away from their home, so not far. And McGreavy would often babysit the children if Clive was at work, or during the period where Clive would leave to go and pick Elsie up at the end of her shift. So Friday the 13th of April 1973 should have been no different to any other. So McGreavy goes to the pub with his friend on that Friday and decides to have a few drinks, with the plan that Clive would come and collect him later on so he could sit with the children while Clive goes to pick up Elsie from work. It's reported that McGreavy had had around 5 to 7 pints of beer with his friend, and towards the end of the evening, him and his friend had got into an altercation because for some reason McGreavy had decided to put his cigarette out in his friend's pint of beer. Which, let's face it, you're going to get annoyed if someone does that in your drink. So Clive picks him up and takes him back to the house. Clive puts 4-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Dawn and 8-month-old Samantha to bed before he goes out at 10:15 in the evening to pick up Elsie from work. He would always leave at that time so that he could get there slightly earlier, have a pint for last orders, and then help Elsie tidy away before coming home. And they were usually no longer than an hour. Now what happens next is nothing short of barbaric. I mean, all murders are horrific, especially with, high levels of violence. But what he did was truly, truly shocking. And if you don't like to hear things that have happened to children, I suggest you skip forward past this bit, because I'm about to describe exactly what McGreavy did to those poor children when he was left alone with them. So McGreavy is alone with the children. He's drunk. He's probably still agitated from the fight that he'd had earlier. And at some point, 8-month-old Samantha wakes up crying, as babies do. The longer she cries and the more McGreavy can't settle her, the more enraged and the more angry he gets. And eventually he snaps. He puts his hand over Samantha's nose and mouth and tries to suffocate her. He also strangles her. Once she has died, he goes into the bathroom, picks up a razor, goes back to Samantha and uses it to inflict wounds on her body. He then goes on to murder both 4-year-old Paul by strangling him and 2-year-old Dawn by strangling her and then slitting her throat. Once all 3 children have died, he proceeds to go down into the basement where he picks up a pickaxe and goes back to the children. He then uses the pickaxe to mutilate the children's bodies further. Still not content that that was enough, he carries the children outside. The next door neighbour's backyard has a wrought iron railing around the edge of the property with spikes on the top, and he goes and one by one he impales each of the children onto the spikes. Once he's done that, he leaves. At 11:15, Elsie and Clive arrive home and realise that neither McGreavy nor the children are in the house, and the police are alerted. After a search at 1:20 a.m, a police officer finds the bodies of the 3 small children on the next door neighbour's garden. Around 2 hours later, McGreavy is found wandering in a nearby street and is arrested. Now, when he's arrested, he's reported to have said, "What's this all about?" However, a couple of hours later, he did admit to killing all of the children, although he couldn't give any reason why. On the 28th of June 1973, McGreavy appears in court for a 10-minute hearing in which he pleads guilty to the murder of 4-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Dawn and 8-month-old Samantha. He enters no defence, he gives no motive, and he doesn't try to claim for diminished responsibility. He was sentenced to life in prison for all 3 murders, with a minimum term of 20 years. Now, interestingly, in 2009, he was moved from a high security prison into a category C prison, I believe, which is basically an open prison. So he had the freedom where he was given permission to leave the prison, but he had to return at a certain time. And one of the British newspapers, The Sun, I believe, got pictures of him walking the streets in Liverpool and printed a story. He and his legal team sought to obtain an anonymity order for him, and controversially, he was granted. The anonymity order prevented the press and anybody else from being able to reveal where McGreavy was and what he was doing. Now, obviously, this was massively controversial because this guy is a triple child murderer. The public surely has a right to know where he is and what he's doing. And so in 2013, it was taken to the Court of Appeal, where thankfully a judge had the common sense to overturn the order. Then in December 2018, McGreavy goes before the parole board after spending 45 years in prison. And the parole board agree that he has been rehabilitated enough to be released. And so he was. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about that. In English law, a 45-year sentence is very long, really long. I know in America is probably nothing at all. You guys have massive sentences. But I don't know how comfortable I feel with a triple child murderer ever being released from prison and knowing that he's now walking around. I don't know where he's living or where he's based. But yeah, it's one of those cases where we know who did it, we know what happened, but we will never ever find out why. And I just feel so strongly for those parents. That must be a question that they've asked themselves for the past 45 years. You know, why? So if you've enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please click on the subscribe button. I would appreciate any likes, and I would love to hear your thoughts and views on this case, because honestly, it's a shocker. It really is. I have more cases that I've researched that I'm going to be making videos about, and I'll be posting them soon. You know, I'm also going to be dealing with paranormal stuff, you know, personal experiences that I've had, interesting cases that I've come across that, you know, you don't always find. So thank you for watching.